Hello, amazing viewers, and welcome to our story corner. Today, we're going to travel to a sunny town called Kudugu. It was a place full of busy streets and smiling faces. And on one particular bright morning, something very special happened. Something that started with a little boy and a pair of old, worn-out boots. Our story begins with a young boy named Malik. He was about 8 years old, with thoughtful eyes. On this sunny morning, Malik wasn't playing games or laughing with friends. He stood quietly by the side of a dusty road, all by himself. His clothes were a bit torn, and his feet were bare, pressing into the warm earth. In his small hands, he held a pair of big, old army boots. He clutched them very, very tightly, as if they were the most important thing in the world. Far down the road, a line of shiny black jeeps was approaching. People were gathering along the road, getting ready to wave and cheer. Inside one of those jeeps was President Ibrahim Traore. He was a kind leader who was on his way to a happy event, the opening of a brand new school for children. He was looking forward to seeing all the excited students. As his car moved along, President Ibrahim always made sure to look carefully at the crowds. He liked to see the people of his country. He saw many happy faces, waving hands, and cheerful smiles. But then, just as his convoy was about to reach a big crossroads, his eyes spotted something different. He saw Malik. Malik wasn't waving. He wasn't smiling. He just stood there, small and serious, holding those old boots. The president noticed Malik's torn clothes and his bare feet. He saw the worry on the little boy's face. The president's heart felt a sudden pinch, like a little stone had dropped inside. "Stop the car!" President Ibrahim ordered his driver. The big jeep screeched to a stop, and a cloud of dust puffed up from the road. His guards looked surprised. Why were they stopping here, in the middle of the road? But the president didn't wait. He opened his door, stepped out of the car, and walked straight towards Malik. The crowd that had been cheering just moments before fell completely silent. Everyone watched. They couldn't believe their eyes. The president of the country was walking into the dust. All for one little boy. President Ibrahim knelt down so he was eye to eye with Malik. He had a kind and gentle smile. "Hello there," he said softly. "What's your name, son?" Malik looked down at the old army boots in his hands. He was a bit shy and overwhelmed. "My name is Malik," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the rustle of the leaves in a nearby tree. "Those are very special boots, Malik," the president said, noticing how carefully the boy held them. Malik nodded, his eyes still on the boots. "These were my father's," he explained. "He was a soldier. He went to fight in the East. And he didn't come back." The president's eyes softened with sadness. He understood. "Your father was a brave man," he said quietly. "And where is your mother, Malik?" Malik's voice trembled a little. "She's very sick at home. We haven't had any food since yesterday." He looked up at the president, and now there were tears in his eyes. "I tried to sell these boots. I walked all over, asking people if they wanted to buy them, but nobody did." He hugged the boots tighter. "I didn't want to sell them, President. They were my father's. But my little sister is so hungry, and I didn't know what else to do." President Ibrahim's heart ached for this brave little boy. He reached out gently and took the boots from Malik's hands. They were very worn, full of scuffs and even a few small holes. But the president knew these boots had a story. They had marched on long journeys, they had stood strong on battlefields, they had belonged to a hero who had given everything for his country. "Your father was a true hero, Malik," President Ibrahim said, his voice full of respect. "And I give you my word, you will never, ever have to sell his boots. His memory is too precious." Malik looked up, confused. He didn't know who this kind man was, only that he spoke with great importance. Who are you?" he asked. President Ibrahim smiled, a little sadly. "I am someone who owes your father, and many brave soldiers like him, a very big thank you. A thank you that we must show with our actions." He stood up and called over his team of helpers who had gathered around. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I want you to find this boy's mother immediately. Make sure she gets help. And I want a full list by the end of today of every single family in this whole area who has lost a father, a son, or a husband in the army." His team nodded quickly, understanding the urgency. The crowd watched in complete silence. many with tears in their own eyes. Then President Ibrahim did something even more amazing. He gently picked up Malik and placed him inside the lead car, right beside him. The convoy of jeeps started moving again, but this time, it moved a little slower. It was carrying not just a president, but also a little boy, and a promise to make things right. As the cars drove away, an old man in the crowd whispered to his friend, Perhaps this is the kind of leader we have been waiting for. One who sees even the smallest among us. That very same evening, long after the sun had set, President Ibrahim Traore sat quietly in his large office. The room was filled with important papers and books, but his eyes were fixed on the pair of worn-out army boots Malik had left on his desk. They weren't just old shoes to him. They were so much more. They were like a picture of a father's last steps, a silent story of sacrifice. They were a symbol of all the brave soldiers and the families they had left behind, families who might be struggling, just like Malik's. They were a quiet call for justice, a whisper asking for help that had not been heard until now. The president knew he had to do something big. He picked up his phone and called for an emergency meeting. He asked the heads of the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Social Welfare, and the Office for Veterans Affairs, all the important people who were supposed to help soldiers and their families, to come to his office right away, even though it was late at night. When they were all gathered, looking a little worried and curious, President Ibrahim's voice was calm, but very firm. He began, I met a boy today. He picked up Malik's father's boots from his desk and held them up for everyone to see. His name is Malik. His father died fighting for our country. His mother is sick. They have not eaten. They were trying to sell these boots, his father's precious boots, just to survive. No one in the room spoke. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall. These boots, the president continued, his voice growing stronger, should be in a museum, honored and respected. Instead, they were almost sold like old trash. This happened because our system, the system we are all part of, failed this family. He gently but firmly placed the boots back on the table. So I ask you, tell me, where did the money go? Where is the help that this family, and others like them, were promised? One of the officials cleared his throat nervously. Mr. President, he said, shuffling some papers, according to our files, our records show that Malik's family already received their full payment, the money they were owed after the soldier passed away. President Ibrahim raised an eyebrow. He looked straight at the official. Are you absolutely sure about that? Did you check thoroughly? Yes, Mr. President, the official replied, though he looked a bit less certain now. Then, President Ibrahim said, standing up, his decision made. Let's go and see for ourselves. We will visit Malik's home, tonight, before midnight. And so, late that night, President Ibrahim arrived unannounced at Malik's home. It wasn't a grand house. It was a tiny, humble home made of clay, with small holes in the thatched roof. Inside, it was dark and sparse. Malik's mother, whose name was Maryam, lay on a thin mat on the floor. She looked very thin and weak, and she coughed softly. Malik's younger sister, Aisha, who was barely 5 years old, was asleep beside her, curled up next to an empty cooking pot. When Maryam saw the president standing in her doorway, she tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Mr. President, she whispered, her voice hoarse, I didn't expect you, sir. You shouldn't have to come to a place like this. President Ibrahim replied gently, his heart heavy at the sight of their struggle. No, Maryam, it is I who should apologize. I came because something is very wrong, and I need to understand. He knelt beside her mat, just as he had knelt beside Malik earlier that day. He asked her softly, Maryam, after your brave husband passed away, did you receive any support, any money from the army to help you and your children? Maryam looked at him with tired eyes and slowly, sadly shook her head. They told me they said money was coming, she whispered. We waited and waited, but it never came. Hearing those words, President Ibrahim felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest. The officials' files had been wrong. This family had been forgotten, or worse, cheated. The very next morning, a full investigation began. The president wanted answers, and he wanted them fast. Within just 2 days, the truth came spilling out. It was a sad and ugly story. The payment for Malik's family had been approved on paper, but a greedy, dishonest officer in the army had stolen it. He had created a fake bank account and moved the money there, And it wasn't just Malik's family. This corrupt officer had stolen funds meant for more than 100 soldiers' families. He had used forged signatures and given bribes to others to keep his secret safe. For 2 long years, this terrible secret was hidden. Maybe some people suspected, but no one had wanted to look too closely. Or perhaps they were too scared to speak up. President Ibrahim was deeply disappointed and angry. He went on national television to speak directly to all the people of his country. He didn't try to hide the problem. He held up Malik's father's boots once more. "My fellow citizens," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I cannot stand before you and pretend that everything is fine in our nation. It is not. We have lost brave men and women in war, people who fought to protect us. And then, we, their country, betrayed their families when they needed us most. This is a shame upon us all." His voice was strong and clear. "I have ordered the immediate arrest of all those responsible for this crime. They will face justice. And I promise you, we will fix this broken system." And he kept his word. That very week, several high-ranking officers were fired from their jobs. Some, including the main corrupt officer, were put in jail. President Ibrahim then passed a new, very important order. From that day forward, all support payments for soldiers' families would be made directly to them. No more middlemen. No more complicated papers that could be faked. No more excuses. He made every single head of every government department sign a special paper, a declaration. It said, "I take full responsibility for what happens under my watch. I will know every name, every number, every family we are meant to serve." The president then turned back to the people and said, "We are not just changing rules and policies. We are changing hearts. We must care for one another." And back in the small village of Kudugu, life began to change for young Malik and his family. He received new clothes, plenty of good food to eat, and his very first proper pair of shoes. These new shoes weren't to replace his father's precious army boots, but to help him walk forward into a brighter future. His father's boots? They now sat on President Ibrahim's desk in the capital city. They weren't a decoration. They were a daily, powerful reminder. Malik's mother, Mariam, was gently taken from her small clay house to a big clean hospital in the capital city, Ouagadougou. There, she was treated by kind doctors and nurses in a proper room, not a crowded, dirty ward. The government paid for every bit of her care until she was strong and healthy again. Malik and his little sister, Aisha, were enrolled in a brand new school. It was a special school, built as part of a new program President Ibrahim launched right after visiting their home. He called it the Children of Heroes program, dedicated to supporting the children of soldiers. Every morning, Malik proudly wore his polished black school shoes and his new school uniform. He learned to read and write, he made new friends, and he dreamed of his future. But every evening, before he went to bed, he would carefully clean his father's old army boots and keep them right beside his bed. One day, his teacher asked him about the boots. Malik smiled and said, "I'll wear them when I'm big enough. Not to fight in a war, but to serve my country, just like my father did, but in a new way, by helping people." Back at the palace, President Ibrahim didn't stop there. He wanted to make sure his government truly understood the people they served. He invited young widows, women who had lost their husbands in the war, and orphaned children of soldiers to come and speak directly to his cabinet ministers, the most important people in his government. Imagine this. A little girl, only 10 years old, stood bravely before all these powerful ministers. Her voice was small but clear. She asked them, "Why did my daddy die for this country, if you all forgot about us the very next day after his funeral?" A deep silence filled the grand room. The ministers looked down, humbled by her simple, powerful question. President Ibrahim stood beside the little girl, his hand gently on her shoulder. He looked at his ministers and said, "That is a question we must all answer. And if you cannot answer it with your actions, if you cannot show that you remember and care, then you have no place in this government." More changes, more reforms, followed quickly. A national memorial fund was launched. This wasn't just any fund. It was controlled by a board made up of soldiers' widows and their families, not by politicians. They would decide how the money was best used to help those in need. Special mobile teams were created and sent out across the entire country. Their job was to find and register every single family that had been missed or ignored by the old, broken system. President Ibrahim himself started making monthly surprise visits to villages far from the capital city. He didn't just go with cameras for show, He went with trucks full of food, medicine, and school materials. He sat with families, listened to their stories, and made sure they were getting the help they needed. His message was clear to everyone in his government. You cannot lead people you do not see. You cannot help people if you do not understand their lives. During one town hall meeting in a small village, a farmer stood up and asked President Ibrahim, "Mr. President, you are doing so much now. Why all these changes? Why are you doing all this?" President Ibrahim looked at the farmer, and then at all the people gathered. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I am doing all this," he answered, "because one small boy stood in the dust of a roadside, holding his father's old army boots. That boy, Malik, reminded me of something very important. Leadership is not about how much power you have. It's about how much you care for your people, especially those who are most in need." People across the country began to hear about these changes. They heard about Malik, about the boots, and about the president who listened. They started calling this whole movement, this new way of caring and governing, the March of the Boots. It wasn't just about one little boy anymore. It was about thousands and thousands of families, the families of heroes, finally being seen, finally being heard, and finally being respected and cared for, just as they deserved. And it all started with a brave little boy, a pair of old boots, and a leader who chose to stop and listen. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. It shows us that even the smallest voice can spark a big change, and that true leadership means having a heart for everyone. Until next time, keep looking for ways to make the world a little brighter. Bye for now.